Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Trade Coffee. Just a few years ago, Pixar was on a winning streak, matched by very few other studios in animation history. Sure, there was the occasional movie that wasn't exactly beloved by critics, like Cars 2. There was even a notable complete misfire, The Good Dinosaur, which felt like it was quietly released to very little fanfare, almost buried. But those were minor blemishes on an otherwise unprecedented success story. From the moment they burst onto the scene with Toy Story in 1995, Pixar seemed to have the magic formula for creating computer-animated movies that were hits at the box office, while also being taken far more seriously as artists than peers like 2000's DreamWorks or Illumination. Jump to today though, and things are looking a lot less rosy. In fact, with Elemental's rocky box office and polite but mild critical reception, the year after Lightyear turned out to be such a massive disappointment on both those fronts as well, I think it's safe to say that Pixar is kind of at a low point that it's never really encountered before. And that's what I want to explore this week.
Now for Sega Genesis, coming for Super NES, system not included.
Get into it.
When it comes to animated hit movies this year, it seems like two films are going to dominate the conversation. Super Mario Bros. And Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Both were overwhelming successes, even becoming the biggest hits that Illumination and Sony Pictures Animation have ever released. Though it does actually have quite a bit of positive word of mouth around it, if you believe the A-Cinema score it received from audiences, Pixar's Elemental is not going to come anywhere near matching the success of either of those two. Now, nothing against those movies. I've already spent an entire video talking about how much I liked Spider-Verse 2, but their success may just signal the end of something as well. That's because Pixar, despite their sequel habit, felt like one of the last places that big budget movies that weren't based on anything could become reliable box office draws. And without taking anything away from those two movies, it's pretty safe to say that Mario and Spider-Man are two very well-known brands outside of these films. Whereas for years, Pixar could create event films with movies like WALL-E and Up. Premises that not only didn't feel like obvious box office hits, but were not based on anything. It was the Pixar name and the trust that they had built with audiences through classics like Toy Story, Toy Story 2, and The Incredibles. That name was enough that whenever the studio put something out, people were gonna pay attention. But now, it seems animation might start looking a little bit more like live action, where a powerful pre-established brand is easily the most surefire path to a hit. It was probably inevitable, but since I am about to spend a lot of this video being critical of Pixar, I do think it's worth noting. There is something sad about it, even if I'm just about the last person who's going to complain about more good Spider-Man movies getting made. But that's just not where Pixar is at anymore. Their films no longer hold that event-like status, and it's easy to point at some reasons for that. First and foremost, and the thing that really can't be avoided here, is that many of the movies just aren't as good. Films like Onward and Lightyear aren't terrible or anything. I'm even kind of a sucker for the kind of sincere sci-fi that Lightyear is, but they're missing that spark of inspiration and originality that made movies like Up feel so surprising and exciting back in 2009. And yeah, the fact that it's a Buzz Lightyear movie without the actual Buzz or any of the things that people find funny or endearing about that character definitely didn't help. Onward, I have less things to say about, because, it's Onward. Point is though, yeah, the consistency just isn't quite there anymore. But Disney did them no favors either with their post-pandemic release strategy, with Soul, Luca, and Turning Red all going straight to Disney Plus right at release. That was pretty understandable, especially Soul back in 2020, and I'm sure it was really appreciated by Disney Plus subscribers, but it also may have been a devastating long-term blow for Pixar. I know this is a very different kind of movie, but there was a reason that Tom Cruise was so determined to save Top Gun Maverick for theaters, and continually refused to go along with Paramount's plan to release it on Paramount Plus, which would have turned one of the most successful movies of the past few years into a Paramount Plus original. Theatrically released movies just have a shot at feeling like real event films in a way that most streaming movies do not. Pixar, over the course of these 3 movies, got their audience used to seeing their new releases on Disney+. And it's hard to blame the audience for wanting it to stay that way. Like, sure, I love going to the movie theater, but taking a family of 4 or 5 to go to a kids movie is not cheap. Add to that a movie whose marketing campaign didn't seem all that exciting, and that's a recipe for Elemental's opening weekend at the box office. Which is very, very bad news for Pixar, because here's the thing, they also make far more expensive films than their competitors. Just compare Mario to Elemental. On paper, it seems like Mario should be the one that costs more. It's a huge brand, it's got a very star-studded cast, it's got a little Funky Kong, and all that added up to a $100 million budget. Thing is, Elemental cost roughly twice that, which, especially with the benefit of hindsight, just seems like it was a very bad idea. Illumination has always kind of been the king of cutting corners when it comes to the budget, and I think you can see that on screen in many of their movies. The animation in something like Secret Life of Pets just is not on the same level of what Pixar was releasing at the time. But I don't think that explains it all. One of the biggest factors is actually Pixar's creative process, where they want their projects to be able to change and evolve during the production. Creativity Inc., Pixar co-founder Ed Catmull's book about the company's creative philosophy, goes into great detail about how they believe the studio needs to be willing to try things, fail, and be okay with starting from scratch sometimes. It includes quotes like, "Making the process better, easier, and cheaper is an important aspiration, something we continually work on, but it's not the goal. Making something great is the goal." And rather than trying to prevent all errors, we should assume, as is almost always the case, that our people's intentions are good and that they want to solve problems. Give them responsibility, let the mistakes happen, and let people fix them. Management's job is not to prevent risk, but to build the ability to recover. It's a really interesting read, and it paints a picture of a studio that isn't afraid to eat a lot of money by going back and changing and adjusting things, if they feel that's what needs to be done. When the studio is releasing beloved films on a near yearly basis, this philosophy felt like one of the smartest things in Hollywood, and it undoubtedly gave us a lot of great movies for decades. But I wouldn't be surprised to see some of that thinking go away if Pixar can't right this ship quickly. The film industry overall is not in the best shape right now, with movies grossing less money than they did before the pandemic, and streaming services being built on very shaky and usually wildly unprofitable foundations. It seems like not a week goes by now without one of these giant companies wiping a new list of shows and movies off their platforms, just to pocket some cash. Cutting costs just definitely seems like it's at the forefront of most executives' minds. So if Pixar has lost their luster, and elemental level performers are what we can expect going forward, I wouldn't be surprised to see that studio philosophy quietly disappear, and get replaced with something a little more formulaic and safe, like the Illumination model. Not that I expect Pixar to just stop making hits. Next year they have another original sci-fi project, but also Inside Out 2. They also just announced another Toy Story movie, and I wouldn't be surprised to see more sequels following. Whether or not projects like Inside Out 2 will perform as well as the first obviously remains to be seen. But I do think it is worth noting, and maybe a troubling sign for them, that while Toy Story 4 did do really well at the box office, it didn't build on the success of Toy Story 3 in the same way that 3 built on 2 or 2 on 1. They've already gone to the sequel and prequel well so often that I'm not sure how much gas is left in that tank. What I feel like Pixar really needs, and it's so much easier said than done, is an original movie that gets people really excited to go to the movies. Something they used to be able to pull off all the time, but is only becoming harder and harder. Still, while the last few years have been far from the best, I do think it's too early to count them out. I don't think they need a complete reset, but it does seem like they need a creative rejuvenation. Elemental has its charms, but it doesn't really feel fresh at all. Nothing in the marketing suggested a movie that seems all that different from a bunch of other Pixar films. That risk-taking that they were once so proud of seems to have slipped a little bit. If Pixar wants to continue to be successful and maintain the creative philosophy that's driven them for so long, despite the costs, I think they need to find it again. and as soon as possible. So in the past week or so, I was dealing with some serious jet lag after traveling. Now thankfully, coffee is always there for me. And instead of the boring grocery store stuff I used to buy, I've continued using Trade Coffee. Trade is a coffee service that makes it simple to discover new coffees from over 55 top indie roasters, enabling you to make your best cup of coffee at home every day, whatever your taste happens to be. Trade curates it just for you. I've had quite a few of their signature red bags show up at my door now, and they keep impressing. My latest is this Highwire coffee from Oakland that's pretty much exactly as dark as I like my coffee, while also giving me a nice hint of caramel. It's just really great stuff. Plus, Trade is super hassle-free, with free shipping, anytime cancellation, and fully customizable plans. It's easy to upgrade your morning routine with some better coffee. Right now, Trade is offering my viewers a free bag of coffee with any subscription at drinktrade.com/captainmidnight. That's drinktrade.com/captainmidnight for a free bag of coffee with any subscription purchase. drinktrade.com/captainmidnight.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.